And my name is Bingbing Wei, and I'm now working about the carbon salts and sink dynamics in the coastal ocean. And today, thanks for the invitation to give a presentation about my recent work. And it's about the work on the tropical shelves with some cooperation with other courses, and thanks for them. And before that, I will give a short background information about that, because if you look at the global annual annual precipitations, you will find in the whole the tropical regions, like the three areas, they have a much higher precipitation, especially in the Southeast Asian and Oceania. And then if you look at the annual global river discharge, you will find like Amazon, Congo rivers, and also in the East China and also Southeast Asia and Oceania, they contribute a lot to the global annual river discharge, about 31%. And if you look at the global annual precipitations, you'll find in the tropical regions, they have a super higher precipitation, especially in the Southeast Asian and also Oceania. And if you look at the global annual river discharge, you'll find the three huge areas like the Amazon River, Congo River, and also East China, East Asian, and Southeast Asian, and also Oceania. Especially for this part, they contribute to about 31% of the global annual river discharge. And if we focus on the Southeast Asian and Oceania, they contribute about 14%. And if we look at the sediment load, you will find this area even higher compared to the river discharge. And for the Southeast Asian, they contribute about 40% and global annual sediment load. So it's very important carbon from the river and to the ocean system. And also we know this global distribution of the biomass, you will find we also have like three areas like Amazon, Congo, and Southeast Asian. It means not only above ground biomass, also below ground biomass. They have a huge amounts of biomass in these regions. And recently, I mean, last years, there's a paper to show like the annual discharge of this terrestrial organic carbon, including the dissolved organic carbon, also particulate organic carbon. And you'll find the huge amounts of them in the tropical regions, especially the export to these shelf areas. And keep in mind the value of this particulate organic carbon flux is about 180 teragram per year. And we also have another recent result study shows like how much carbon buried in these shelf areas. But between these two works, you'll find we do not know what fraction, like how much percent of this discharged terrestrial organic carbon is finally buried in the coastal ocean of this global area, and especially in the tropical South Asian, because it's contribute a huge amount to a global budget. And also the next one, how is this terrestrial organic carbon dispersed in this region, and which key factors they control its transport and fate? And before to start our work, I will introduce a little bit of the tools that I use to do the science assignments. So first one is carbon isotopes. The normally used or the widely used is carbon-13, because the marine carbon, they have a carbon-13 value about -22 to -20 per million. And for the terrestrial organic carbon, it's dominated by the C3 plants. They are much lower. And if dominated by C4 plants, a little bit higher, from -16 to -10. And except this carbon isotope for the bulk organic carbon, there are also some biomarkers which can have a specific sources. Then we can use them to trace the terrestrial organic carbon contributions. The first is long chain and alkane compounds, which include the N-alkanes, N-alkanols, and N-alkanic acids. They mainly come from the soils and also vegetation organic carbon. And besides this one, we also one called GGGTs, and this is produced by the soil bacteria and the isotopes produced by the marine bacteria. So we can use the ratios to show like the soil organic carbon contribution. And also there's one called long chain barriers, and the C22 and 115 they produced by the freshwater phytoplanktons, and for others the C30 and the C21 and the C3113 they produced by the marine phytoplankton. So we can use their relative ratios to show like the marine freshwater phytoplankton contributions. And based on this isotope and biomarkers, I will start my work. So the first study is called the river mouths are hotspots for terrestrial organic carbon barrier on the Southern Shelf. And look at our study areas. So this is Malay Peninsula and this is Southern Shelf. And there's three main rivers, which called Kananta and Pahang rivers. They aspirate into the Southern Shelf. So we collect the river sediment and also coastal marine sediment. And why we focus on this region or this areas, because it's just a typical small mountainous river system, and it usually have a small drainage basins, high sediment loads, and also low sediment storage capacities. It means this is sediment when they dissolve, they quickly discharged directly onto the shelves. And for this tropical small mountainous river systems, they even have higher temperature and precipitations, abundant vegetation, higher weathering rates, which laid a very high terrestrial organic carbon export. So it's a global significance for the carbon budget. And look at our results. First is the isotope result carbon 13. You will find between the river bed and the coastal marine sediment, you'll find a huge difference between that. For the marine river, for the riverbed sediment, you'll find the value is about minus 30, but it's quickly increased to minus 21 or 22, show very strong marine signals, like from terrestrial signal to marine signals. For the beach, also show from high to low value. The rains also, and also 3A and 2A, they both show a huge difference between the land and the oceans. And for the Dyer's index, and you will find, so this is typical normally used, but we find in this region, we also include another compound that it also comes from the freshwater phytoplanktons. Then if we include this one, they also show huge difference from high to lower. So it means for the beach, rain, or 3A indexes will come from the soils, and for this dyers is come from phytoplanktons, and for the isotope is from the bulk. So the bulk carbon and also different terrestrial organic carbon subpools, they all show a significant decrease from land to the ocean. Then we use balance to a mass balance to calculate based on carbon 13 to calculate how much fraction of the terrestrial and how much of the marine. So this is a fraction of the terrestrial, then you'll find it's only in the river mouths they have a little bit higher value, about 50%, come from the terrestrial, and when they discharge into the ocean parts, you will find the general very, very low, only about 10%, even lower. If we multiply these fractions with the total organic carbon content, then we can know how much the terrestrial organic carbon content, then you will find compared to the riverbed sediment is show huge decrease. I mean, even lower than 0.5. This is a result from the carbon 13 calculations. If we compare to the biomarkers calculation, you will find the beat calculation generally similar to the carbon 13. But for the diets, they have very lower values. This is because the diets represent the more fresh phytoplankton derived carbon. So this kind of carbon are very easily to be degraded in the coast areas. So that's why they have very low values. And then we need to consider which factors controls this significant decrease in the terrestrial organic carbon barrier in this shelf sediments. So one reason could be the carbonate or biogenic arsenic dilution effect, because we calculate the contents with like how much carbon per sediment. So if there are extra sediment contribution, they will dilute this value. But in this region, these two contents are very lower, so there are very minimal dilution effects. And the second one could be the clay mirror fluctuations, because if we look at the mean grain size and also the anomaly index, you'll find it's only in the river mouths a little bit they have a similar value to the river value, and outside of that is a little bit very coarse sediment, like we call sandy swatch, and even outside is a little bit fire, but it's very hard to confine this if they come from this river or just from the nearby like micro rivers. And if we look at the coordinate, the riverbed sediments in the Malay Peninsula have very strong reservoirs, so it's clay is dominated by the coordinate, and also the clay is because it's very fine grain size, so they can have a huge surface area, so it can have more space for the carbon to stay. And if we look at the coordinate content, you will find from the river to the ocean, it's a huge decrease. So it means this coordinates, most coordinates fluctuates at very low salinities, which need the clay deposited near the river mouths, so they do not export further to the coast areas. And also the local hydrodynamic region is also could be the reason, because if in this region, so this is November in wet season and August during the dry seasons, you will find in the wet season, the coast current, the limited offshore transport, they trapped all this sediment just near the river mouths. And in the dry seasons, because the freshwater river discharge are very low, so the plume stratification also was weakened, and also enhanced the sediment settlement just near the river mouths. Besides, there also a very tidal asymmetry. It means like a rapid transition from eddy to flood phase, and a relatively longer flood phase drive the net onshore sediment transport, not offshore. So all this reason we trap the sediment near the river mouths. And for the carbon parts, because we know like this tropical waters, there are high temperatures and full of the bacteria, and they are very favorable for the degradation of this terrestrial organic carbon. I mean, the soil derived or the phytoplankton derived. So both all these reasons, factors need to the reduced sediment export and also reduced carbon, terrestrial carbon export, or just the carbon barrier, because most of them are degraded. Then we use we need to calculate like the sediment and the terrestrial organic carbon budget in this region, and we base on the mass accumulation rate. We know how much carbon, how much sediment barrier in this region. And we define the three different areas like A, B, C. A represents river mouths and B represents sandy swatch and also offshore areas. Then we know the mass accumulation, we know how much carbon, how much sediment barrier in each regions. And finally, we calculate about 41 million tons per year. This value is a little bit higher than the river discharge value. And the extra part could come from the Mekong input. And based on our calculated terrestrial organic carbon content, we can also calculate the barrier flux of terrestrial carbon in different areas. And then we compare them to the river input, then we can calculate the barrier efficiency. It's very low, it's about 18.2%. It's quite low. And we also need to keep in mind, because we calculate the barrier flux of sediment a little bit higher than the rivers, and we think this could come from Mekong, but it also could come from the coast part, like the coast area, not from the rivers. But at that point, I do not quantify this, but I open this question. We define our R value. It's the proportion of heterogeneous sediment barrier flux in the zone A relatively into the river input. Because if you look at the terrestrial organic carbon barrier rates in this region, you'll find it's quite higher in the area A's, which even similar to what we found in large river system like the Amazon or the Yangtze rivers. So it means in this region the river mouth it's a kind of place where most of the terrestrial carbon buried, and the remaining they export into the offshore regions, but they are quickly degraded. So it's like from hot buried and to cold degradations. Besides this one, we need to consider the coast erosion could be a reason for our calculate offset between the river input and the true barrier flux. But it's very hard to confine in that system because that system is a little bit open. So you cannot make a very good sediment budget. So then we choose another area to test our hypothesis. So then there's the second studies, which called the coast erosion as a measure of sediment size in the inner Gulf of Thailand. For that, I would like to show recently papers which shows the top 1 meter soil organic carbon stock changes in this blue carbon ecosystem under different disturbance regions. If we look at the tropical regions, it's dominated by the mangroves, and you will find a huge red dot. It means a great loss, even to 100%. And then we choose in the group of Thailand, you find in the Southeast Asia, they have huge coast erosion happens. Then we choose in the group of Thailand because these areas have a very confined areas, more like a closed system. They only connect to the middle groove in the south part, and they mainly receive the river inputs from these 5 rivers. So it's very easy to quantify the river input. And also this region characterized by the strong coastline retreat. You see the red lines, only a little bit accurate in the river mouth, but for most coastal they show the river retreat coastal retreat. And also for this coast, they're dominated by the mangrove systems. And if you look at the Champagne mangrove areas, changes, so the relative changes you show since the 1950s, they decreased a lot, and until to 1990 or 2000. This is because this area they transferred the mangrove into shrimp farmers, and also deforestation, which led to a huge loss of the mangrove. And also these areas undergoes very fast sea level increase, about 5 times than the global average. This is because these areas have a huge underground water extractions, which need the land subsidence until to like 1 meters since the 1970s. Because of the Manco city, they need a huge of water, and also Thailand, they need a huge of water to do their industry and also human city development. And this is a very interesting pictures which shows like the coastal village. It used to be the coastal village, but now they connect to the coastal with a land bridge, even more than like 100 meters far. So it shows the coastal retreat. The huge coastal retreat and the mangrove deforestation, which can make a much huge amount of the coastal sediment input beside the river input. So then we can calculate the coastal input by we know the offset between how much the sediment barrier in this region and how much the river input. Because I mentioned that this is more like closed system, so the other larger river sediment input are very minimal, because the closed large river is about 1,000 kilometers far. So then I spent some time to look at to collect the data of the river input, and it's very nice. The Thailand, they have more than 100 years of the hydrodynamic yearbooks, so I read the data from that. Then we can calculate how much sediment input and also how much carbon input. If you look at the sediment flux from these 5 rivers, they will show some kind of the decrease in 1970s, most of them. Then I defined a 2-time period, like before 1975 and after 1975, because the most the coast erosion and also most this human activities is worst in 1970s. And based on our calculation, we found like before 1975, the river improved flux about 6.7 and it decreased a little bit into the 5.5. This is because the dam construction in the upper land of the river basins. And also based on the river, as per the TOC content, we can know how much terrestrial and carbon flux. But we cannot do that for the pre-1975 because we do not have the history data for that. So we can only constrain for the up to 1975. And since we know how much a river input, now we need to know how much barrier in these areas. And we collect some data from literatures which did the dating of the sediment cores. Then we can know the mass accumulation rates for and also some of them cores they show the difference between the 1975 and after 1975. If you see the red and black numbers, you will find a huge increase since 1975. Since not all the data they have, they define the different time periods. So, but for the published data, I find like for the shallow cores, they generally have increased factors of 2.5, and for the a little bit deeper sediment cores, they have only 1.5 increase. So I use these ratios factors for the other cores which do not have a temporary change the sedimentation rate data. Then finally, I calculate like how much sediment barrier in this region. So totally in about 20.8 before 1975, but it's increased to 29.5 after 1975 per year. And then we compare the river input, then you will find the coastal input are huge. It was about 14 million gram, like 2.5 times than the river input before 1975, but it's increased to 24 million tons compared to the river input only 5.5, so it's about 4 times higher. So it also shows the increased coastal erosion, which need a lot of coast sediment export into this inner group of Thailand. Then we know how much sediment barrier from the river and from the coast. Then the next step, we need to know how much carbon from the river and from the coast. And it's very nice because this region, the river carbon and the coast carbon, will show different in certain ratio. But for carbon setting, they may be similar, but for the third ratio, it's different because the coastal carbon is mangrove system. They usually have very high certain ratios compared to the river input because there's more fresh materials. Then I use this difference to make a mixed model for 3 elements: marine, river, and the coast. Then we calculate how much fraction of each sizes, then how much carbon of each sizes. And for the river, you will find the high value generally in the river mouth is very similar to our results in the Malay rivers. Then we calculate the total barrier flux in the inner group of Thailand. So for the river, it's about 62.7 gigagram, and for the coastal, it's about 76.3 gigagram. And we compare this flux into the river input, then we can calculate the barrier efficiency of each carbon input. So it's quite higher for the river input. It's about 33. It's higher than the global average. Global average is about 20 something. And for the coastal carbon, you find the barrier efficiency is much lower, only half of the river. I was so surprised by this value because it's super lower. Then we move a little bit further. If we use this barrier efficiency for the global mangrove, because we can treat as a more stable value, and we also use a decline rate of this mangrove forest. And because for the global mangrove system, they also have the estuarine and also marine, and other studies focus on the coast. So we use the marine mangrove sediment organic carbon stock. Then we calculate the CO2 emission from this mangrove organic carbon loss. So it's about 175 teragram per year. So it's very similar to the previous estimates. And if we transfer the CO2 flux into the how much carbon per year, so it's about 50 teragram carbon per year. So it's about 26% of the global river POC input. And imagine this, we only calculate the marine mangrove sediment, and how about the estuary, and also how about other blue carbon system? If we calculate all of them, this value should be very huge. So let's go back to these pictures you'll find. If all this soil carbon stock changes, if this carbon was discharged into the coast oceans, if they have also very low barrier efficiency, then the CO2 emission should be very, very huge. So it means this soil organic carbon, this blue ecosystem are very fragile. So we need to protect them, especially in a very urgent priority. And finally, I use this picture to show this mangrove or this blue carbon sink. So the thing is very strong and efficient carbon sink, but if this carbon was dissolved into the coastal ocean, they can be a carbon bomb. So it's maybe a disaster for the whole ecosystem. And thanks for your attention.